All right, so TikTok CEO Shouji Chu recently had to make an appearance before our members of Congress in a hearing that is basically centering around whether or not TikTok should be banned here in the United States. So there's a lot to get into. Obviously, I think that there are valid points to be made on both sides of this debate, and I'll give you guys my view here in a second. But first, I just want to get into some of the highlights that we saw coming out of this congressional hearing, because, listen, some members of Congress had decent and fair questions. Some other ones clearly don't even understand the very basics of how technology functions or how social media functions or how younger generations are using these kinds of apps like TikTok. And that was honestly just hilarious and also disturbing to see that, like, these are the people who are getting to make some of the highest decisions on these matters, and they literally do not even understand how, like, the internet works or how Wi-Fi works. And you're going to see a little bit of that here in a second. But without further ado, let's just go ahead and jump into this highlight reel that was put together on this.
TikTok access the home Wi-Fi network
has ByteDance spied on American citizens.
I don't think the spying is the right way to describe it. The only face data that you get, that we collect, is when you use the filters to have, say, sunglasses on your face. We need to know where your eyes are. And
why do you need to know what the eyes are if you're not seeing if they're dilated?
American data stored on American soil by an American company, overseen by American personnel. We call this initiative Project Texas.
Please rename your project. Texas is not the appropriate name. We stand for freedom and transparency, and we don't want your project.
You damn well know that you cannot protect the data and security of this committee or the 150 million users of your app, because it is an extension of the CCP.
From the data it collects to the content it controls, TikTok is a grave threat of foreign influence in American life.
With a lot of respect, American social companies don't have a good track record with data privacy and user security. I mean, look at Facebook and Cambridge Analytica.
Madam Chair, my time is up. And if this committee gets its way, TikTok's time is up.
Okay, you could tell that that last guy, he was practicing that in the mirror for like hours before this hearing came up. But again, I mean, you see at the beginning of the clip, this first guy, he's asking like, can TikTok access the home Wi-Fi network? And that wasn't even just the extent of it. He goes on later in that same clip to ask continuing questions about like, well, if it can get access to the Wi-Fi in my home, can it get access to all of the other appliances and the other pieces of technology in my home and like hack into them? And they don't seem to understand the basics of this. But there were some other questions in there that I think were somewhat fair, like about data and privacy concerns and all of that good stuff. But I also think that a lot of that would apply equally so to US social media companies who definitely are mining, extracting our data, and then selling it on markets for other companies or their own companies to do whatever the fuck they want with it, with barely any real regulations or oversight in terms of protecting Americans' security on that front. But another aspect of this that I definitely want to mention is that this is obviously coming in the middle of sort of this like rhetorical and like actual policy and military shifting and posturing towards China as they are continuing to become a greater presence on the global scale, right? Obviously their economy is comparable to that of the United States. They have a military that is obviously, being built up. It's still not even scratching the surface of the US military funding or US military bases or anything like that around the world. But we're basically at a point where, this sort of Cold War II electric boogaloo between the United States and China is heating up right now. And this also comes as China has been, asserting themselves more and more on the global stage in different various ways, whether it's the Belt and Road Initiative that they have been deploying and investing in infrastructure projects around the world and gaining some, leverage in whatever form that it may be over some other countries. We also saw them recently negotiate some sort of a deal between Iran and Saudi Arabia, two regional rivals and powerhouses in that region in the Middle East. And so they're exerting some diplomatic force as well. And they, of course, also proposed that Ukraine peace plan, which you could have tons of criticisms of because I think it was kind of like, basically just freezing where the current battle lines are. But anyways, the point is they are starting to exert themselves more on the global stage. The United States doesn't want that. Obviously, we want to be, or our leaders want us to be, just the global police force, the global dominant superpower economically, militarily, and anytime that another country like China or like the USSR back in the day starts to rise up and challenge our global hegemonic control of the world, we are starting to get, more and more scared by that, right? Our leaders want to have this pushback, and so during these hearings you did see a lot of sort of like Red Scare freaking out and hysteria about the threat of the Communist Chinese Party, and they're trying to like infect the brains of young Americans and turn them against the country and shit like that I think just goes completely completely overboard. But again, I think there are fair questions in terms of just data privacy and security concerns that, again, I would apply equally so to US companies as well. But just a little bit more information in terms of some of the basics on this. So they say here from the AP, US lawmakers have grilled TikTok CEO Shouji Chu about data security and harmful content, with some pushing to ban the popular short video app nationwide. Chu, a native of Singapore, told the lawmakers that TikTok prioritizes user safety as he sought to avert a US ban on the app by downplaying its ties to China. They say both Republican and Democratic representatives aggressively questioned Chu on topics including TikTok's content moderation practices, its data security plans, and past spying on journalists. Here's a look at what some of the concerns about TikTok and its ownership structure. So they say, why does Washington say that TikTok is a threat? They say TikTok, which has over 150 million American users. I mean, this is like, I think it's the largest social media company here in the United States at this point, certainly for the younger generations, but 150 million Americans, right? Obviously, that tells you that if they ban this, this is going to have massive implications for millions and millions of people across the country who use this for, in some cases, hours and hours and hours a day. And also, I'd like to add, I'm not really like the biggest fan of TikTok personally. I mean, I use it sometimes. I managed to stay off of it in the early rise of TikTok for a long time. I eventually got one. And, for the most part, my feed is just like leftist politics and like, some like just goofy, funny, random videos and shit like that pop up in my feed. So it's not something where I like have too much weight one way or another. I wouldn't really miss it if it was banned. I also do think that it's like actively rotting the brains of millions and millions of especially young people, but that's kind of aside from the point, because that could go equally as much for any social media app that we want to talk about. And so, unless you want to just take them all off the board for young people, then I don't think that's a legitimate argument. But they say that TikTok, 150 million users, is a wholly owned subsidiary of Chinese technology firm ByteDance, which appoints its executives. They say ByteDance is based in Beijing, but registered in the Cayman Islands, as is common for privately owned Chinese companies, and many American companies as well have, used the Cayman Islands to their advantage. But they say its headquarters is in Beijing's northwestern Haidan district, home to key universities and a hub for tech startups. TikTok has dual headquarters in Singapore and Los Angeles. Founded by Chinese entrepreneur Zhang Yiming in 2012, ByteDance is said to be valued at around $220 billion, nearly half of its 2021 valuation of $400 billion. So I guess the valuation has been trailing downwards as there's been more talk of banning TikTok in one of the largest markets here in the US, but they continue saying that publicly traded tech companies and privately held ones like ByteDance have plunged in value since the ruling of the Communist Party tightened control over the industry with anti-monopoly and data security crackdowns. And that's a kind of a key important difference that I don't think Americans really understand between how the economic and political structures of the US versus the Chinese government actually function. Essentially, in the most simplest rudimentary, explanation I could possibly give, in the United States, we have a country where corporations control our politicians. They control our political realm. In China, they have basically the reverse of that, where you have a political realm, a government apparatus, where you do have a lot of, capitalist enterprises within China. And what I mean by that is you have the top-down capitalist hierarchical structure within some of these corporations, but the government supersedes all of that, right? The government actually does crack down on some of their monopolies. They actually do confront some of that capitalist sector in meaningful ways that the United States honestly just does not. So it's sort of like a state capitalist approach versus an approach where you essentially just have a handful of oligarchs who are in complete control of a political system like here in the US. So I think that's kind of an important difference to understand in terms of how they handle a lot of their companies, like ByteDance, for example, where yes, you do have a lot more top-down control over some of these companies within China, but they say that Western governments worry that Chinese authorities could force ByteDance to hand over TikTok data on American users, exposing sensitive information. What exactly they mean by sensitive information, I think some of that is up in the air. You also have the aspect here where it's like, okay, even if you did ban TikTok in the US, it's not as if other social media companies are not also collecting this data and selling it to groups and other organizations and companies around the world. It seems like it would be pretty easy for the Chinese government, if they wanted to get their hands on this data through other avenues. And it's not like, banning TikTok is just going to simply solve that problem. If you wanted to actually solve that problem and the whole conversation surrounding the problems with TikTok at a ground level, what you really would need to do is just pass broad scopes privacy protections for the American people. I don't think that TikTok, banning that, taking that out of the marketplace is necessarily going to improve that situation. So that's basically the rundown of like the general scopes of what are some of the concerns and all of that. Now I want to get to some of the pushback here. So I think that AOC made a couple of good points. She made a response video. This was actually her first TikTok that she's ever made, and it was defending TikTok in some ways. So let's just listen to a little bit of what she had to say, and then I'll give you some more of my thoughts on the other side.
First of all, I think it's important to discuss how unprecedented of a move this would be. The United States has never before banned a social media company from existence, from operating in our borders. And this is an app that has over 150 million Americans on it. Some of the arguments about banning TikTok have come in with respect to discussions around Chinese surveillance and utilization of data that is tracked, and the enormous amount of tracking on US citizens and data that is harvested by TikTok. And they say because of this egregious amount of data harvesting, we should ban this app. However, that doesn't really address the core of the issue, which is the fact that major social media companies are allowed to collect troves of deeply personal data about you that you don't know about without really any significant regulation whatsoever. In fact, the United States is one of the only developed nations in the world that has no significant data or privacy protection laws on the books. The EU, for example, has something known as the GDPR, which really forces an enormous amount of protection on individual users and the amount of data that companies can collect about you without your knowledge. So to me, the solution here is not to ban an individual company, but to actually protect Americans from this kind of egregious data harvesting that companies can do without your significant ability to say no.
Okay, so I mean that's basically, I actually hadn't watched that much of this clip. I just watched the initial part of that originally, but that's pretty much exactly the argument that I was just making earlier in this video, right? Is that, if the fundamental critique here is that, a company like TikTok, a social media app like TikTok is able to collect sensitive data and then potentially do something nefarious with it, well, as she just pointed out there, that goes across the board. That is due to a lack of regulations, okay, a lack of restrictions in terms of protections for Americans' data and privacy in that regard, okay? That's a broad scope's fundamental problem with that lack of regulation. It's not just specific to TikTok. Okay, so that would be my general consensus here, right? Why are we not aggressively pushing for broad scopes legislation to protect our data across the board? Well, that's an interesting question. And then you get into follow-up questions about, what is the undue influence of some of these US-based social media companies like Facebook, right? Which obviously owns Instagram, which is the primary competitor to TikTok, right? All of this undue influence, the millions and millions of dollars that are funneled into our political system by some of those companies like Facebook to influence US politicians who, oh, by the way, have significant personal investments financially in some of those companies like Facebook, like Snapchat, and the rest of them, right? They have investments in that. They're getting money from those companies. Is there a connection there where you're about to potentially take out and straight up ban their largest competitor that has been exponentially growing faster than any other social media app in the United States? I think that's another component part of that, right? Because you have this dichotomy here where you're using, the scary CCP communist government threat to be like, okay, we're going to ban this one company, but then you're not actually getting to the root of the problem and passing any sorts of legislation to protect Americans' privacy and data across the board, right? Kind of makes you think there's a little bit of a correlation there between that corporate funding within our political realm and the lack of adequate regulations and the singular focus on TikTok as an app. Okay, so that would be my main takeaway from this entire situation. Let's get into some of the polling data here because this is kind of interesting as well. It kind of gives you an insight in terms of how easy or difficult this will actually be to pull off. It seems like, if I had to guess right now, they're definitely trending in the direction of following through on this ban. So here from CBS News. They ask a couple important questions here. They say, TikTok's ties to China, a national security risk. Among those who have heard about TikTok, okay, so this isn't TikTok users, just those who have heard about TikTok, yes, say 56%, no, say 22%, 22% not sure, so seems like the majority overwhelmingly think that it is somewhat of a national security threat, whatever that might mean. They say, should the US government ban TikTok? Again, this is just among those who have heard about TikTok, so I'm sure that many people who are responding to this poll have never been on TikTok. They don't really know exactly what their kids are doing on TikTok. Maybe they're just a little bit nervous about it. They're buying into some of the Red Scare propaganda right now, but they say 61% favor the ban, 39% oppose. Now, this is the most interesting one because here you see favor on a ban on TikTok among those who have heard about TikTok, but then you actually go to the age range, which is like basically the only age range that is actually using TikTok actively for the most part, 18 to 29-year-olds and even younger than 18, 39% say they should ban TikTok. So that's actually still a substantial portion of young people who are potentially on TikTok who still think we should ban TikTok, but it's also significantly lower than, for example, like the plus 65 who think 83% of them think that it should be banned. And honestly, I don't even think most people in this range who answer this poll could really give you a description of what TikTok is, how it works, or anything like that. So it's interesting polling data here. I definitely think this is a really interesting conversation. Again, I don't think that this has like super deep implications for me personally. I could do with or without TikTok. I'll use it every once in a while. It's kind of like fun to go see some different videos. People make really unique content on TikTok that I actually do genuinely like. There's a lot of leftist content creators who do great work on TikTok. So, maybe it would be a little bit of a shame. I'm kind of like selling myself on TikTok right now and not banning it as I'm thinking about other content creators who do make good stuff on there. But anyways, that's the general, consensus of what is going on right now. I'll keep you guys updated if we get any other big developments in terms of whether or not they are or are not going to follow through on this ban. But honestly, again, I think this is mainly just part of this overall, push towards trying to demonize China, trying to gear up for a potential, Cold War II or World War III with China as we are continuing to position our military presence more and more surrounding China in the Pacific, trying to gear up our Navy, get that funding for a potential showdown over Taiwan or something like that. And this is just, in a dual process way, it's them somewhat saying that they're worried about data privacy, not really addressing the underlying issues. They also have those financial connections to a lot of those US-based social media companies. And then you have that Red Scare aspect going on. You have this military buildup going on. So honestly, it's just kind of a shit show right now. But again, I will keep you guys updated as we get more information.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying